I'm James Swanwick. This is the Alcohol-Free Lifestyle Podcast, where you learn to live a life of health, wealth, love, and happiness. All right, welcome to the show. I'm James Swanwick, and today I am joined by Joseph Oliver, who is a mindfulness coach and a breathwork coach who helps stressed out entrepreneurs and helps them generate peace and calm, which is a big thing for our audience because we have a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs who are drinking too much, they're stressed, they're anxious. And Joseph is a Brit. He's from Gloucestershire, which for those who are unfamiliar with England is near a big city called Bristol to the west of London. And Joseph's actually a former client of mine, probably 6-7 years ago now in terms of business. Certainly didn't need to give him any support as it related to his drinking. He's already and has been mostly alcohol-free for some years. Joseph, great to have you here, mate.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Breathwork. What is breathwork and why do we do it?
All breathwork really is, to put it simply, is the act of gaining conscious control over your breathing. So it's kind of a strange concept to people because breathing is something we do unconsciously, right? It's something that we do every single day. It's the first thing we do when we come into this world, and it's one of the last things we'll ever do, quite literally. But breathing can create massive physiological and neurological changes in the mind and body. And that's why it's so powerful. So it's really not that difficult to take conscious control of your breathing and create a different state of being, so to speak.
Are human beings breathing the way nature intended us to breathe?
The classic example that you always hear is you should breathe like a baby, because most of us start off breathing correctly. But as human beings, we learn through osmosis, which is watching other people and unconsciously picking up on their habits. So a lot of people don't realize that we unconsciously pick up on their breathing habits as well. So people are stressed and we see them breathing heavily through the mouth, and then we start doing that too, and it creates this like negative cascade.
I'm going to ask you in a few minutes just to talk us through what's an optimal breathing technique that our listeners can implement. And we'll talk a little bit about maybe a 10-second breath work, 20-minute breath work, up to an hour breath work. But first, just tell us a little bit more about you, where you're from, what you do, and just so we know you a little bit more.
Absolutely. So for most of my adult life, I worked as a professional chef. And I started off kind of at the bottom, as they say, when I was about 17 years old. And I worked in all the kitchens in London and then went into the more fine dining areas and eventually ended up becoming a private chef. And I would travel all around the Mediterranean and the Caribbean working for these high elite entrepreneurs, basically being their private chef. And that was actually one of the reasons that I started drinking a lot, because it's synonymous with the chef lifestyle. A lot of partying, a lot of alcohol. And I noticed after many years, it took a toll on my health, and it took a toll on my mindset and obviously my physical body. And I started getting anxiety, stress, and even depression. And that was one of the reasons I left the cooking world and got in contact with you and started my own business, because it was just not sustainable. It was very unhealthy.
Just move that microphone a little bit closer. Yeah, sure. Perfect. So tell us a little bit more about what it was like being a chef on these boats, yachts, right? Like very wealthy business owners. Like just dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, so we were always in places, like Monaco, in the Riviera and the south of France, and Saint-Tropez and parts of Spain. It's very interesting to peep into that world because these people live a very different lifestyle. And I guess one of the reasons that I left was I didn't like being on somebody else's time. So, if it's 1 o'clock in the morning and they come back from a party and they want sushi, I'm the guy. So they come knock on your door and you wake up and you've got to be ready to make anything. So you have to be quite versatile chef, and you have to be very knowledgeable at various different types of cuisines.
And you got to be willing to get up at 1 o'clock in the morning and be on right away.
Yeah, and you've got to be willing to work for quite literally months with no days off, 7 days a week, and you're up making bread at 5 o'clock in the morning, and you're trying to get in a nap in the afternoon if you have time. Basically, my whole day was structured around taking breaks as and when I could, because you're just so exhausted.
And how long would you be on a yacht for?
They're seasonal, most of them. So, the work in, say, the winter period would be almost like going to a job, like 9 till 5. And then when the owners come or the guests come, and all of a sudden it's all systems go. And then you're working for literally, I think the longest stint I did without a day off was about 95 days.
Wow, that's a lot.
16 hours a day.
And what were your sleeping quarters like on these boats?
You share most of the time, unless you're in a higher position. So the captain, for example, will get his own quarters. But I used to share with the engineer. So you're like two grown men in a tiny cabin on bunk beds.
What was that like?
Claustrophobic, to say the least. A little bit uncomfortable. There's not a lot of privacy. And you live where you work, right? So it's very hard to switch off. You're always thinking about what you've got to do.
Yeah. And what were the businesses that many of these wealthy people owned or did? Like, how had they made their money?
That's a great question. I found that a lot of them were serial entrepreneurs. So they had multiple businesses. But generally speaking, there was always one business which really took it to the next level for them. But that was after, many failings, so to speak.
And was that in a particular industry, like tech? Was there a pattern to the industries that they were in? Or?
I worked for a lot of people in recruitment and retail. That was the two ones that I saw the most consistently.
So when you say retail, they owned like a big department store, or they owned particular brands? Or
yeah, brands and department stores. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And how did they treat you?
Again, that's very varied. You tend to hear horror stories. It's a very small industry, as you can imagine. And I would chat with other people that worked on different boats, and they had very different stories to me. I was very lucky. I worked for some really, really lovely people. And I worked for one particular family for 3 years, and it was like being an extended member of their family, and they treated us very, very well. And everyone I worked for was really, really nice. I think it's just the intensity of that type of work that tends to put people off. The people, generally speaking, tend to be nice.
And what were your drinking habits when you were working on these boats? Like, did you go and partake in alcohol, or was it absolutely a no alcohol zone?
Well, I was a chef, so we kind of have our own way of doing things, I guess you could say. If I felt like it, I would have a beer with my lunch whilst I was working in the kitchen. I even convinced myself that it actually helped me cook, because I used it as a relaxant, because it's such a stressful environment. You imagine being in any kind of professional kitchen is notorious for being a high stress environment. But if you add the fact that you work where you live, and you add the fact that you're at sea and the boat's moving like this, going up and down, that makes it even more stressful. So I would make excuses to myself and say it's okay to drink because I need it to get through the day type thing. And I want the energy, and I want to feel relaxed, and I want to feel calm when I produce this food.
And did you?
I mean, to an extent, but obviously the price you pay for that later on definitely isn't worth it. And then the guests would also, because you got to understand that you're working when people are on vacation. So they're always trying to get you to have a drink, and you finish the dinner and they're like, oh, thank you so much, come have a glass of wine. And it's very difficult to say no. And then one glass of wine can turn into a few glasses of wine. And then you wake up the next day and you've had terrible quality sleep and you feel groggy, and you've got to perform again because you're not getting any rest time. So it was just this gradual deterioration of my health over the years that I worked there.
And I'm assuming during this time you weren't familiar with breathwork as a modality, or probably business, creating a business for yourself. Or maybe that was in the background as you were doing that. But just talk a little bit about the evolution from what you've just described, that career, to trying some businesses or business, and then ultimately now being mostly alcohol-free and being a breathwork coach.
Yeah, so the letting go of the alcohol and the other vices was really the catalyst, because eventually I started to have much more clarity of thought, and then that came with new ideas. And then I was like, okay, well, maybe I can do more than this. Maybe I can be more than this. I was around all these people that were very successful, and I used to think to myself, if they can do it, why can't I? And that led me on, I guess you could call it a journey of self-discovery, where I started experimenting with different things, different health tools and protocols and biohacks, and breath work naturally came with all of that kind of stuff. And that was the thing that I found to be the most impactful for me. And at that point in my life, it was about escaping my current paradigms. It was about overcoming the stress and the anxiety and the depression. And what I found is, after I had facilitated that and I got to a nice level of homeostasis, so to speak, then I was able to think about more expansive things. Then I was thinking about, what does it mean to feel really good? How happy can I be on a day-to-day basis? How can I change my baseline habitual states to really enjoy my life as much as possible? And breathwork was a really powerful tool for helping to facilitate that.
How did you and I first come into each other's being, I guess?
I went to a business event in London. So this was whilst I was still working on the boats and I had time off in the winter. I believe it was with Brandon Carter. And that was actually my first ever exposure to any kind of business or entrepreneurship. And I remember they were talking about funnels and all of these terms that I'd never heard before, and it just blew my mind. And you were one of the speakers. And you had a particular impact on me. And I think that was because you were already involved in health and helping people with their health. And I remember I actually brought a pair of your blue light blocking glasses at the dinner. And that was what led me to starting my first business with you. And I got your help with that.
Yeah. Brandon Carter is a great guy. I think his Instagram is King Keto, and he helps younger guys start their own online business, and he's very fit and healthy. And he was running this event in London, and he invited me to come and speak there and talk about the success of Swanwick Sleep, which is my blue light blocking glasses company. And we went out to dinner that night, and I think you may have requested that I mentor you in a professional capacity, or maybe I referenced it in my talk and you applied. Do you remember the circumstances around how you ended up becoming, I guess, a mentee in a professional sense?
Yes, I remember in your speech, you spoke about how you paid Ty Lopez, I believe it was $25,000. And it was such a huge amount of money for you at the time.
Yeah.
And it was very scary because you didn't know if the results were going to come afterwards, and it was all brand new territory for you. And I was like, wow, I need to do something like that. I need to find somebody that's already walked this path, so to speak, who can help me get to the next level. And I believe I reached out to you after the event and proposed the idea to you.
Okay, got it. Great. And then you joined, I think, a business mastermind of mine with about 6 other guys, I think, who I was supporting and building an online business. And then that involved Zoom calls. In fact, I remember you joining one of these Zoom calls from a boat somewhere in the Mediterranean.
Correct. And we were on anchor. So it was by pure luck that there was actually signal, and I was able to hotspot my phone to my laptop. And I remember I was in my cabin because that was the only place I could get an ounce of privacy. So I had the laptop on the bed, and I was standing up with my phone balanced as close to the ceiling as possible to try and get the signal so I could receive the call. Yeah,
amazing. And so what did you learn and what did you do as a result of being in that mastermind?
That particular mastermind, it made sense for me to call upon skills that I already had. And obviously I knew a lot about chefs and I knew a lot about that industry. So we ended up creating a product that you helped me a lot with, which was chef pants and clothing for chefs. And the idea behind it was that chef clothes generally are very unfashionable. And so we made them more fashionable with better quality materials because a lot of them contain nylon and things that aren't so good for your skin. And that was incredible because we literally went from me having, I'd barely used a computer at that point. I literally knew how to cook and that was it, to actually creating a business that actually became successful as well. So it was an amazing transformative experience. And that was one of the things that really showed me that I could do these things that had previously been unavailable to me.
How much of it do you think was accountability, of having a support group of other people doing that? How much of it was having a mentor, I guess? I mean, I wouldn't say that I was a mentor. I was more like a moderator of mentors, right? Because there were 6 of us, if I recall correctly, and each 6 brought their own unique set of skills.
Hi, I'm James Swanwick. Have you downloaded my free Alcohol Freedom Formula yet? If not, you can go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/guide. You can download it. It will outline the same process that we walk our clients through in our flagship 90-day stop drinking program. You'll also get an email from me each day with tips and tricks to reduce or stop drinking, to improve your health, nutrition, mobility, and lots of other great mindset techniques. That's alcoholfreelifestyle.com/guide. What did you learn about accountability or mentorship or coaching or anything from that process?
I definitely learned that accountability is king. And I would say it is one of the most important things. You can't really make anywhere near as significant progress if you don't have a support group, if you don't have accountability, and you don't have other people that are on the same path as you and trying to do the same thing, because it makes it more real. And as they say, rising tide raises all ships, right? So when you see other people doing their best and having success, that encourages you and motivates you to do the same thing.
Yes. We're going to get into some breathwork stuff here in just another couple of minutes. But how did you then go from Chef Pants, the business, to now you're living in Medellin, Colombia? As we're recording this, you're expecting your first child. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're a breathwork coach. Talk us through how that came to be.
Towards the end of my cooking career, when I was moving away from all the unhealthy aspects of the lifestyle, and I started the business, I was doing that, as you know, simultaneously with still working the job. And then I started meeting these other people, like people from your mastermind, who seemed to be traveling and they worked when they want. And that opened up a whole new world of possibilities for me. So I started experimenting with different personal development and self-help tools and protocols and hacks and tactics. And that led me on a bit of a journey all around the world. So, for example, I went to Spain to do a 7-day water fast in the mountains. And then I came here to drink ayahuasca and things of that nature. And I did all these kind of crazy things to really try and discover a deeper meaning in life. I was really looking for what my purpose is. And it was when I found the mechanism of breathwork that really started to open things up for me. And so at that point, I had the clothing business, and I decided to not continue with that. And I wanted to do something that was a bit more impactful for people. I wanted to help people overcome the same obstacles that I myself had overcome, like the stress and the anxiety and the depression, etc. And so I thought, why not start a coaching business around that?
Before we get into the breathwork, tell me about the 7-day water fast and ayahuasca. What was that? What were those experiences like?
Very challenging. At that point, I'd never done any kind of prolonged fasting. I'd also broken my leg a few weeks prior, and it was actually my last official day of work on the last boat I ever worked on. And we were coming into the port, and it was really windy that day, and it had been raining. And I went down to we'd have these things called fenders, which are these big squidgy balls that stop boats from banging into one another. And I was trying to put a fender in a specific place, and I'd slipped, and my leg got caught between the key and the boat. And then I just heard this snap, and I managed to pull it out, and it could have been a lot worse. So I broke my femur in 2 places. And I had all of this stuff planned as like my transition away from the chef lifestyle. And it was very uncomfortable, but I decided that I was going to do it anyway. So I went to Spain and did the fast with the broken leg. And the first thing that I noticed is the pain significantly decreased from my leg. And they say when you go into a fasted state, the healing mechanisms that we have naturally built into our body tend to accelerate because you're not digesting food. So that was very interesting for me. And the next thing that I noticed is I gained a huge amount of clarity on what it was that I wanted to do next in my life, because I was in a peaceful environment and I was in this more meditative, altered state of consciousness due to the fast. There's some science that backs this up. You have increased dopamine during a prolonged fast, for example. So that was really, really interesting. And then I flew to Colombia, went and drank ayahuasca, and that opened up a whole can of worms. It was profoundly uncomfortable and different kind of experience, like nothing I'd ever had before. And it allowed me to let go of a lot of the old behaviors and negative habits that I'd been holding on to. And so that really allowed me to transition into this new lifestyle that I was trying to create for myself. So it acted as a catalyst, I guess you could say, to really amp things up and move forward.
What would you say to folks who have a healthy dose of resistance and skepticism towards plant medicine. Most of our listeners, I won't say most, let's say many of our listeners would probably consider themselves to be quite conservative. Corporate America, want to do better, but plant medicine hasn't been in their conversations. It's not in their conversations, right?
Sure.
It's probably mostly just alcohol and food and work and family and things like that. What would you say to that type of person about your experience with ayahuasca or plant medicine?
I'd say a couple of things. First up, I myself was extremely skeptical, but I thought, what's the worst that can happen? And be very careful when you do research on these things, because depending on where you look, you're going to find things that might reinforce the beliefs that you already have around it. So I was, as best I could, open-minded to the experience. And then secondly, when I went there, I was expecting to see all these like hippie type people, very spiritual people. And I actually found there to be a lot of networking opportunities. Really, really hyper successful people in various different fields were there really for their own personal growth and development. And a lot of people utilize these plant medicines to further their business and other practical aspects of their life. So that was really, really surprising. And I myself have noticed significant gains in different areas that there doesn't seem to be a direct correlation. So I would say, be open to new kinds of experiences, because it might just change your life.
Thank you. All right, breathwork. Let's change gears here a little bit. Tell me about your first breathwork experience, and then we'll go from there.
My first ever breathwork experience was, I guess you could call it jumping on the deep end, because I went into an altered state experience. So there's a whole spectrum of breathing that you can do out there. Everything from your habitual breathing patterns to using it to amplify and deepen a mindfulness or meditation practice, and then all the way to these deeply profound altered state experiences. So this kind of breathwork is very heavy, very intense. It's combined with music. It's akin to things like holotropic breathwork and rebirthing breathwork, if people want to Google those. And it's designed to put you into a different state of mind. And a lot of people don't realize how powerful breathing is. So the first time that I did this, and I felt this energy generate in my body, and I felt my hands clench up, and I felt all of these different new sensations that I'd never experienced before. I was like, what is going on? Like, what is this? This is incredible. And so that was my first ever experience.
Let me share my first experience. I was at Ben Greenfield's place in Spokane, Washington. Ben Greenfield is a New York Times bestselling author. He's a big health influencer. And there was a friend of mine, James Swanwick, who was hosting this breathwork experience. And I was at Ben Greenfield's house with about 12 other male entrepreneurs. And we were having a weekend there of adventure and talks and masterminds. And James Swanwick is a professional breathwork moderator, let's say. And I lay down on the living room floor. I laid down on the living room floor of Ben Greenfield's place, and James walked us through this breathwork experience. And I started doing the breathing. And about 10 minutes in, I literally thought that Ben had put a hot water bottle or something underneath my back before I sat down, or that I was laying down on an electric blanket, because my whole body felt warm and hot. Like I could feel my back literally get hot. And to your point, I started to, my hands started to clench, and I started to kind of shake like this. And I'm not saying this was uncomfortable in any way. To the contrary, it was actually very pleasant. It was slightly worrying, because I'm like, oh my goodness, what is going on? And because it's so new, I felt a little concerned. But generally it was like, oh, this is a interesting feeling. This is a pretty, wow, what's going on? And it brought me to tears, candidly. I think we were doing the heavy breathing for maybe 20 minutes. It could have been 30 minutes, but my whole body got hot. My fingers were clenching. I started to see like maybe like a kaleidoscope might see, you know, when you're a kid and you look through these kind of things and there's different patterns and that was kind of the view that I was having with my eyes closed. And it was euphoric in many ways and also scary in other ways, but mostly I would say euphoric. Is that similar to what you experienced?
100%. And that's what I see with a lot of people. And that's actually one of the reasons that I love breathwork as well, is because it can be a little bit intimidating, but it's way less intimidating than plant medicine. So the kind of breathwork that we're talking about right now can be akin to a psychedelic journey, and you can get all of the benefits without necessarily the scary, dangerous stuff, if you want to call it that. So I see people all the time having these beautiful, profound, euphoric experiences that kind of break their paradigm of reality of what's possible for them. And the best part about it is it all comes from their own breath. So yes, there's facilitators. Yes, there's music playing. Yes, there's other aspects, but the transformation comes from them and their own breathing. And that's very empowering for people.
Mm. And so tell me a little bit more about your first experience with it. Like, what was the lesson that you took out of it, maybe?
So, well, apart from the physical sensations, there wasn't any breakthroughs for the whole hour. It was an hour-long session. And then right at the end, just when they were wrapping things up, I had this incredible experience where it was almost like my body felt like it was being lifted off the ground. I felt weightless. And I gained this incredible amount of clarity. And the message that came through, so to speak, and I'm not making any kind of metaphysical claims here, whether it was from my subconscious or it was just an idea I had or it came from the ether, I really don't know. It was just, this is what you've got to do. This is how you have to help people. And that's what I was really, really searching for. And it's a testament to the power of intention. If you hold an intention in mind for a long enough period and you keep working at it, eventually it's going to come into fruition. And that was what I got out of that first session.
Wow. So your first session inspired you to now be a breathwork coach.
Exactly right.
And what happened from there?
The very same day, I bought a program on to how to be a coach and how to generate your first leads and your first clients. And I believe within 6 weeks, I had my first client.
Amazing.
So that was the first time I was making videos and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. A listener might say, well, hang on a second. You learned about breath work for 6 weeks. You did it, and now you're coaching someone on breath work. So can you learn everything and be considerate enough of the people that you are leading to say that you are an experienced coach of breath work after 6 weeks?
I would say this. You only really have to be 1 or 2 steps ahead of somebody to help them. And if you generally care about that person and you want to help them, then I don't see any harm in that. And the exchange, meaning the investment that they make, is really important for them to take it seriously. So was I an expert in breathing at that time? Absolutely not. But what I found is, and I believe I learned this from you, one of the best ways to learn is to teach. So the fact that I stepped into that role so quickly just accelerated my whole journey to the point that I'm at right now. And it's not just about teaching people breathing techniques. As you know from running a coaching business, the accountability, the support, the community that you create, the videos, the resources that people get access to, these are all other very important elements to helping somebody with a transformation.
Yeah, the fastest way to learn anything is to teach it. So whenever you learn a new skill, whether it might be piano or Spanish or whatever, immediately afterwards, what I try to do is I try to find someone and then try to teach them what I just learned. And that does 2 things. It teaches the person that you're teaching, but it also reinforces the learnings that you've just put into your own brain. So yes, very powerful tool to learn anything. I wish I knew this when I was studying for my high school exams back in the day, because I would have absolutely crushed, I think. Okay, great. And so you had your first client within 6 weeks, and then what happened from there in terms of the business and who you got to support?
So I had a small background in business from what you had taught me in the past and the other few things that I had done at that point. But it was a huge learning curve to learn how to generate clients, to learn what people really wanted, and also improving the product over time to the point now where we get to help a lot of people and we have people coming through our programs, and the process is somewhat refined now and pretty dialed in. So that's really nice to get to this point.
Who's the we that you're referring to?
Generally speaking, I work exclusively with men. because I found that the group element is a really integral part of the transformation for the individual, and being part of a community that represents something to them, being part of a movement almost. So I do work with women, but typically on a one-on-one basis if they just really want to work with me for whatever reason. So typically it's young guys that are hungry. Well, I say young, anywhere from 25 to 45, I would say is the range. Although we do get people outside of that occasionally, and just people that really want to improve the quality of their life. Tony Robbins says that the quality of our life is dictated by the quality of our emotions. And breathwork is one of the fastest and easiest ways to change how you feel. So it's people that are really looking to enjoy life as much as possible.
In January 2023, I hosted about 30 of our Stop Drinking clients in Medellin, Colombia for our annual event. We have an annual event called AFL Live. It's taking place in Sedona, Arizona in January of 2024. And I invited you to come and lead a breathwork for our 30 clients who'd flown into Medellin. And we took them sightseeing around Medellin for a couple of days. We did some business masterminds. And then the final session of the day that we had in the hotel, you were leading a breathwork. Tell us a little bit about that experience, what you did for us, for our clients, and what were some of the anecdotal stories that you heard people share with you afterwards.
That was an interesting session for me, because normally when I host people with breathwork, there are people that have actively chosen to be there, and a lot of people didn't know that was happening until like pretty close to it, right? So they weren't necessarily open. And I guess I was a little bit apprehensive, because I was thinking, well, if they're not open to the experience, how are they going to have a powerful, transformative time during the breathwork? And I was pleasantly surprised to see how many people went really, really deep into the process. And that just showed me what a powerful tool breathwork can be. So even if you're skeptical, you can still have these really powerful breakthroughs during the experience. There was some very emotional people afterwards. People were looking at various traumatic events in their life that they were able to face during the breathwork, being in the altered state, and they were able to process that and alleviate that. So that was really, really beautiful to be able to facilitate that.
So walk our listener through what they can expect through a breathwork session.
Through a breathwork session, something that's really, really important before you even get going is to do a detailed breakdown, because a lot of people don't realize how powerful these experiences can be. So you want to make sure that they're well prepped for what they're getting themselves in for. Generally speaking as well, I do send people dietary recommendations and things of that nature prior to the experience, because it's all about you and your breath. So the more optimized your physical body is, the more likely it is that you're going to have a deeper experience. So, for example, if you've had a few beers the night before, you might have a good experience, but it's likely not going to be as powerful as if you had a clean system, right? So that's really, really important. And then what we do is we build the energy of the room. So we start very, very calmly, and we start to guide people in with more of a meditation. And the idea is we get people out of their heads and into their bodies. And then we slowly but surely start to amp up the speed of the breathing. Okay, and a lot of people might even call this hyperventilation, but it's not really. And it's done deliberately, and it's done with intention. It's perfectly safe. People have been doing this for quite literally thousands of years. And the music corresponds with the intensity of the breathing, and that's designed to deepen and amplify the experience and also guide people through the session. So I'll be playing instruments, and we have various different sounds and smells and things to create an amazing atmosphere. And at some point it will reach like a crescendo piece, like a peak point, which is designed for breakthroughs. And then slowly but surely it will tail off and just give people time to process whatever it is that they need to process during that session. So it's an opportunity to release trapped emotions. It's an opportunity to process traumas all the way back from your childhood. Even birth trauma is quite common. It's a chance to gain a lot of clarity, epiphanies, and realizations for your life and your business. It's an opportunity to have a vivid, almost psychedelic level experience, if that's what you're looking for. And then we'll bring people back down and then ground in a new, better, happier, more powerful energy. So everyone leaves in a different state.
For the uninitiated who might be listening to this now, can you give me an example of the depth or the ferocity or the strength of the breath. Can you just demonstrate it to me now for like just 20 seconds, just so they get an idea? Because some people might be thinking, well, I don't really understand this breath work. Am I just going, or am I going?
Yeah, so the breathing itself, there's an intuitive aspect to it. So it can look very different for different people. Personally, I always think it's better to breathe a little bit more intensely. Generally speaking, if it feels like nothing's happening, that's an indicator that you need to breathe harder and breathe deeper. But the framework that we teach has 4 different elements. The first is you breathe through the mouth. Reason being is the mouth is associated with emotional breathing, and in a sense, we're deliberately triggering an emotional process. Secondly, you breathe deeper than you normally would, so diaphragmatically. Mm-hmm. Thirdly, you breathe faster. And finally, you breathe in a continuous cycle. So there's no pausing between the inhale and the exhale. Mm-hmm. It just keeps going. And like I said, that can look very different for different people. It could be... We can get even crazier than that. Like there's an infinite number of ways that you can do it. It could be more calm than that. Generally speaking, it's going to be some kind of exaggerated breath, because that I'm feeling the effects right now.
You're feeling it now, yeah.
I should have done that before we started the podcast. That's the key. That's what allows you to enter this altered state. That's what puts you into a different frame of mind. And it might seem intimidating to do it like that, but you don't have to breathe like that for the whole hour. If it's an hour session, for example, you can pause, you can hold the breath, you can breathe through the nose, and they can be some of the most beautiful parts of the experience. But that's how we get in there.
My experience of breath work has been it's quite uncomfortable for me in the first 5 to 7 minutes or so as I'm beginning it. I feel lightheaded, I feel dizzy, I'm going, and I start to get lightheaded and I start to get nervous to the point where sometimes I haven't pushed through. In fact, I've pulled back. And I still get benefit and I still have breakthroughs and I still feel my body changing, but the lightheadedness is so strong that it feels uncomfortable. How do you help people push through that discomfort?
One of the ways I help people is by doing a lot of breathing myself. And if I notice people, if I feel that they need to breathe harder and breathe deeper, I'll be kind of breathing near them and encourage them to go through. Because if you get through that 5 to 7 initial minutes, at some point, and it can happen in less time than that sometimes, the body's going to take over and it's going to start to feel really good and the breathing's going to become effortless. And that's when you know you're in this different state of mind, and that's where a lot of the benefits come from. So what we do in the live sessions is we really push people, it's almost military in the first 5 to 10 minutes, just to push them into that old state, because there's always that moment where they need to make a decision. They're like, okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm feeling lightheaded, I don't like this, I've got resistance, and we want them to break through that resistance. And most people do, and then that's when all the wonderful things can happen.
Yeah. Why does our body literally feel like it's getting hotter or warmer? Why do our fingers sometimes clench? Why do we see the kaleidoscope with our eyes closed of the different colors and the different shapes? What's actually going on in the body?
So the monks in the Himalayas do a form of breathing which they call tumo breathing. And it's a very intense breathing technique combined with visualization exercises. And they'll use it to generate a massive amount of heat in their body. And they actually have these competitions where they'll melt the snow around them because they generate so much heat. It's incredible. And that's actually where, for those of you who know, the Wim Hof method is derived, I believe. One of the reasons that happens is because you create a release of adrenaline, which heats the body. And so that makes us very, very hot. And so sometimes when we do sessions, especially when you have weather like here in Medellin, it gets very sweaty for a lot of people. That's why it's good to do it in an air-conditioned room. The hand clenching, there tends to be this huge buildup of energy in the body, and they actually call it tetany, which is like an involuntary contraction of muscles. And this can feel really, really uncomfortable, but generally speaking, I like to tell people it's a good sign, because that means that you're changing your physiological state, and it's perfectly safe. No one ever has permanent damage from anything like that. But like you said, it can feel very, very uncomfortable. And what was the other part that you asked me?
The kaleidoscope, the colors that you see when your eyes are closed.
A lot of people think that the more psychedelic aspects of the breathing comes from releasing DMT in the pineal gland. There is evidence to suggest that that may be true, but a lot of the effects that you're talking about actually come from changes in your oxygen and CO2 levels. So, yeah, it's surprising.
Is it possible that there could have been more survivors of the Titanic sinking if those who were in the water did breath work, as you're suggesting? Because apparently if you do that breath work, it heats up the body sufficiently enough that maybe Jack didn't need to die. Maybe he didn't need to drown. Maybe he could have just sat there with Rose on the floating door and been doing breath work like and they would have lived happily ever after.
I'm going to say yes. They should maybe make a new version of that movie with that being the ending.
It's possible then, right?
It's definitely possible. It's a nice thought as well. And breathing can be a life-saving tool if you know how to utilize it properly.
So if anyone's stuck in freezing cold water, they fall through the ice for whatever reason, and they're shivering and probably they're going to die, if they focused on doing some of the breath work that you've been talking about, maybe they can prolong their life or even save their life.
Most definitely. They can control their nervous system so they don't go into shock, and they might be able to generate just enough heat in their bodies that it would keep them afloat long enough for somebody to come and rescue them. Yeah.
So the United States of America and its healthcare system. I was doing some research here. In 2022, the White House pointed to something called the Parity Act, pressuring insurers to meet requirements that broadened mental health coverage to match coverage for physical conditions. And they essentially what it's saying is they should be taking into account more of these non-traditional modalities of supporting people, such as breath work. So what is it like currently in the US healthcare system? What is the thought process around things like breath work as a serious way to help reduce mental illness, to reverse health conditions? You know, what's the state of play in the US to your knowledge currently?
I'd say people are definitely more open to this kind of thing than they were. I'd say even as recent as 5-10 years ago, there would have been an immediate dismissal. But now people are becoming more wise to things like antidepressants and anxiety meds and things like that, maybe not being the solution. And people are looking for more sustainable alternative ways to improve their health and their quality of life. So, I mean, I'm very immersed in this world, and the things that we've been talking about today is kind of some of the crazier aspects of breathing, but there's some very, very simple things that you can do which aren't so intimidating, let's say, that can have a profound impact on your overall health.
Yeah, we'll get into that in just a second. I'm just reading here a meta-analysis in the journal Scientific Reports of 12 randomized controlled trials of breathing techniques for stress reduction linked slow or fast techniques of breath work to slightly lower stress levels, decreased depression, and gentler anxiety symptoms. What do you think about that?
I'd say that's accurate, and I would even go as far as to say that some of the techniques that they use in these controlled studies, in my opinion, probably aren't the most effective techniques that you could use. And what I've seen personally is you can have a radical impact on stress, anxiety, and depression in quite literally seconds if you do more targeted techniques, let's say.
There's another study here. Controlled breath work showed promise in another study published earlier this year by Stanford's Huberman Lab. Scientists reported that breath work was more effective than mindfulness meditation in decreasing stress and boosting well-being.
So a lot of your listeners are entrepreneurs. They're busy people. I imagine they have families as well. So it might not be practical for them to sit down for 30 minutes and do a meditation every day. So a great alternative, and as you can see, might even be more beneficial, is just doing 5 minutes of breath work. 5 to 10 minutes. You can do it very, very quickly, and it can have radical results.
So researchers in that Huberman Lab study that I just referenced used 3 common types of breath work. There was a type of drawn-out exhalation called cyclic sighing, box breathing, which is the alternation of inhalations and exhalations with equally long breath holds, and a type of hyperventilation, that variably uses short and long exhalations.
So the first one, they're talking about making a physiological sigh. This is something we do naturally. I believe it's approximately every 5 minutes anyway, just to calm down our nervous system. So as I said in the beginning of the podcast, breathing's something we do every second, but we can gain conscious control of. So if you make yourself do these physiological sighs, just you can create what's known as a parasympathetic response, your rest and digest. So you can activate feelings of relaxation really, really quickly just by making an audible exhale like that.
So if I'm someone who experiences alcohol cravings, I drink, I want to drink, I'm craving a drink, is it as simple as me just going, and if I do that a few times, is my craving for the beer or the wine or the liquor or whatever, is that going to subside?
It's definitely going to help, for sure, because if you think about it, a craving is a physiological, it's a physical sensation. So you feel the cravings like normally here or here, right? So the first thing you need is awareness, because a lot of the times when we experience cravings and we act upon those cravings, it's an unconscious decision. You know, whether it's like, oh, I want to drink, and you're just kind of going through the motions, or I want to eat a piece of cake or whatever it might be. So the first thing that you need is a degree of awareness. Okay, I'm feeling a craving right now. Oh, that's what that is. And what that does is it creates a degree of separation between your conscious mind and the craving. So that's great, because that means we can respond instead of reacting to it. And then what the breathing does is it really acts as a pattern interrupt. Okay, it creates a new alchemy in the body, a new chemistry, if you will, a new physiological change. So you really don't have to do many breaths in order to facilitate that. And as you just did there was perfect. Some kind of exaggerated breath, is going to create enough of a change. And I would say to people, I'm not going to say do it 3 times, 10 times, 20 times. Just do it enough until you don't feel the craving anymore, because it's going to be different on any given day.
What happens if you're out at dinner, you got friends, they're all drinking, you intend not to drink, and the waiter or waitress comes over and says, can I get you started with some drinks? I don't think we really want to be sitting there going, excuse me, guys. I'm okay, and actually I don't want to drink now. So what would you recommend to that person to do to try and eliminate the craving to order a drink?
Something else that you can do, which is a similar process but doesn't require breathing, would be learning how to let go of the craving. And again, if you wanted to give you a very brief process for that, again, the first thing you need is some level of awareness. Okay, I'm experiencing craving. The second thing I would recommend is, instead of resisting it, just welcome it. As they say, what resists persists, right? So just welcoming that feeling and allowing yourself to sit with that feeling is going to alleviate it somewhat. And it might feel uncomfortable for a minute. And then finally, just decide to kind of let it go. And you don't have to do these exaggerated breaths to so to speak, breathe it out. So the breathing can help you with making the decision. And we do this all the time. You probably had moments in your life where you said, screw it. And you kind of just let it go. That's what I'm talking about. And it's almost always synonymous with a little breath where you go,
yeah.
So you can just do that once and make the decision.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And then, of course, if you're in private and there's no one else around, then you could probably do a more exaggerated breath, I would submit.
Yeah, maybe leave that for being at home or something like that. Right?
Is there any breathing that we can do if we're just walking along the street, or we're walking in a park, or we're wanting to be intentional about our breathing, where we don't want to be so exaggerated, where we're doing the but we can breathe a little better or a little deeper, and it's a little bit more it's not so obvious to people who might be watching you?
One thing I like to do when I'm walking, I don't actually have a name for this technique. Maybe somebody knows it, because I do believe it's derived from the yogic traditions, is you just ever so slightly pinch your nostrils, and then you and you just exhale through the mouth, nice and relaxed, making that physiological sigh if you want. The reason I like to do this whilst walking is because you're walking, so you're using up more oxygen. And squeezing the nostrils creates resistance to the airstream, which increases the oxygen intake. So this is kind of how you get high off your own supply, so to speak. So you don't need to do many of these breaths to really feel those sensations and those effects, and it can release a lot of dopamine, and it makes you feel really, really good. So you can do 5 of those whilst you're walking, and you're going to feel fantastic afterwards. Another thing that you could do is just quite simply, instead of being on the phone or listening to music, is just kind of disconnecting whilst you're walking and just being very mindful of your breathing and making sure you're breathing through the nose. And then your walk can almost turn into like a meditation.
Some more Google research revealed that scientists are testing breathwork's ability to prompt changes in addictive behavior, heart rate variability, and electrical activity in the brains of adults seeking help for cannabis use disorder. So it seems like there's increasing studies and increasing study results to suggest that breathwork can really change many areas of our life.
Most definitely. One thing I really personally love about it is you can use it as a preemptive measure and a combative measure. So the handling with the cravings would be a combative measure, but it's such a great way to start the day. And then if you do it consistently, and that's another great part about breathwork, is because it only needs to be 5 minutes, so it's very sustainable. You have this compounding effect that builds up over time.
Where can our listener and viewer find out more information about you and some of your breathwork techniques?
All of our social media handles are The Vibe Mentor.
The Vibe Mentor? How did you come up with The Vibe Mentor?
The Vibe Mentor, it's a good question. I guess because one thing that I was very passionate about was, as I mentioned with my own journey, was changing what I call my baseline state, my habitual emotions, my habitual ways of thinking. And so I guess some people in certain circles would call that your vibrational state.
Yeah.
And so I guess, okay, that's what I'm helping people with. So
yeah.
Mentor seemed like an appropriate word.
Yeah, the Vibe Mentor. Good vibes.
Good vibes.
Good vibes. Well. Let me just, as we head for home here, just ask you a couple more questions. So someone's listening here, they want to implement some level of breath work into their life. Maybe let's call it 1 minute a day. Now you might say, come on, shall we do 10 minutes a day? Why 1 minute? But let's just say the absolute bare minimum that gets someone moving, gets some momentum going with breath work. What's 1 minute a day that someone can do here to both reduce alcohol cravings and also to just feel better?
If you literally only had 1 minute, and you wanted to get the biggest ROI from that huge amount of time invested, what I would recommend is you do 30-30. So that means 30 breaths, which would take you approximately 30 seconds, followed by a 30-second breath hold.
Okay, let's do it. We're going to do it now.
Let's do it together.
You want to do it?
Yeah.
All right. So tell me what I got to do.
So you're going to inhale through the nose.
Through the nose? I thought that you said you got to inhale through the mouth.
If we're doing the more extreme breathing. But
okay.
For the purposes of this, you want to breathe through the nose, so you get increased oxygen intake. You also get nitric oxide, so that opens up all your vessels, and you get better oxygenation to the brain and muscle tissues.
Okay, so we're calling this the 30-30 breath work?
30-30.
Okay.
So in through the nose, out through the mouth, so we can make that sigh that we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
So you're creating an energized but calm response in the body.
Okay.
Creating balance and alignment and all of this kind of stuff. And then once you get to around 30 breaths, you finish the exhale nice and naturally, and then you proceed to hold the breath for 30 seconds.
Now, just before we do this, I have done breath work before and I've passed out and fallen off a chair. Now, I don't know if I was doing that incorrectly or I was doing it so correctly, so well, that it had that result. I remember, in fact, I did a combination of the Tony Robbins thing. I think he calls it priming, does he? Where you kind of, and you're moving your hands up and down. And I remember doing this and then holding my breath. And then I literally woke up and I'd fallen off the chair. And there was a good lesson because now I do it on a sofa and I've got like little cushions and pillows around for me. And I don't want to discourage people from attempting this by me sharing this story, but nevertheless, what happened there? Why did I pass out?
generally speaking, if you've not done breathwork before, it's likely they don't have a really high tolerance to CO2. And as you do these breathing techniques, there's a buildup of CO2 in the body. CO2 is not a bad thing, by the way. That's really the prana, that's the chi, that's the magic substance that allows oxygen to do its job properly. You need CO2 for proper oxygenation. So it's actually a really, really good thing. So over time, as you build a CO2 tolerance by doing these techniques, you'll build a stress tolerance as well.
Okay.
And this is one of the reasons that free divers just tend to go black when they dive for too long, because they build up such a high CO2 tolerance. They don't feel the stress and the fear and the anxiety that comes up from not getting any oxygen in. So with the Tony Robbins technique that you're talking about, the priming, you're getting this physiological movement in as well, which is using up more oxygen. It's also a very powerful breath, both on the inhale and the exhale, so or whatever it is, right?
Yes.
So that is more intense.
Yes.
The way that I'm saying to do it right now is more balanced, because we're doing this more forcible inhale, but we're doing this relaxed exhale. So that's going to bring more balance to the autonomic nervous system.
Okay, let's do it. This is the 30-30.
30-30.
Okay.
I'll breathe with you, but I'll also count us so we know roughly where we are.
Okay.
So it's better to close your eyes.
Okay.
And we'll go from 3, 2, 1. That's 10, keep going. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, halfway now, fantastic. Relax into the sensations. Keep going, 20, 8, and 7, and 6, and 5, and 4, and 3, and 2, and 1. Relax and exhale, hold. I'm just going to count down roughly from 30. As James is holding his breath, one of the cool things about doing breathing like this is if it's too intense, you can just slow down the intensity. Just breathe a little bit softer. Or if you feel like you want to amp things up, you can breathe even harder. Probably just over halfway now. So once you're holding your breath as well, you want to make sure you relax into it as best you can. You want to allow the sensations to wash over you and just as best you can enjoy them. I'll do 5 and 4 and 3, 2, 1. And relax. How do you feel after that?
I've felt really, really good, and it felt amazing, and it feels amazing now. I could feel my heartbeat going right through my body. So it wasn't just here, I could feel it in the heart. When my eyes were closed, I could feel like the boom, 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 boom through my hands, through my arms, through my legs.
Interesting, and it's also not a really fast beat, which is probably what people would think after doing something like that. It's a slow, powerful beating of the heart.
Yes. Yeah. Let me bathe in this feeling for a moment.
Okay.
And it was only 30 seconds of the breathing and then 30 seconds of holding the breathing.
Yeah. Could I offer you one
Yes.
small critique? A lot of people have this tendency to breathe upwards when they and their shoulders kind of go up like this. So it's a little bit restrictive. You want to breathe more horizontally. So the nasal cavity actually goes backwards. Most people think it's up because of the shape of the nose, but it's actually more beneficial if you almost breathe backwards rather than...
Oh, really? Okay. So breathe backwards, don't breathe forward. So as opposed to... Okay, that's a great tip.
More
breathe
expansive.
backwards, yeah. Amazing. Well, I think I'm going to be feeling pretty damn good for a little while. And that was 1 minute, 30-30.
The special technique for this podcast.
Yeah. All right. Well, Joseph, thank you so much. Really appreciate you giving us your guidance and expertise.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Yeah. And to the listener, the Vibe Mentor.
The Vibe Mentor.
Yeah.
Across all platforms. I'm on probably the most active on Instagram. And we actually have a couple of free YouTube videos that guide you through some of this more intense breath work that we were talking about later. So you can do it safely. It's got all the recommendations, and you can do it from the comfort of your own home. You don't even have to come out and see me anywhere.
Joseph, thank you very much.